had put out a Reddit survey saying, for those of you who've left the Mormon church, what is it that the first thing that really started you on your faith crisis?
Seerstone.
Like they call it a faith crisis. And the Seerstone in the hat was 60%.
Welcome to Latter-day Saint Ideas. I'm Andrew Knopp. I'm joined today with my friend David Janeway and Jim Lucas, author of By Means of the Urim and Thummim, which is an awesome book I finished reading, Restoring Translation to the Restoration. We're really excited to have Jim here with us, and I wanted to start by giving a brief introduction to him. For those of you who don't know him, James Lucas is an attorney who's lived in New York City most of his adult life, but is now living in Utah. He received his undergraduate degree from Brigham Young University and law degree from Columbia University. So you're a lightweight, in other words. Just kidding.
Yeah.
In recent years, he's written both books and articles on constitutional and public policy matters. Most recently, he has co-authored with Jonathan Neville, By Means of the Urim and Thummim, Restoring Translation to the Restoration. So we're excited to welcome Jim.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So we wanted to talk today. Your book has so many great, important facts. I really enjoyed it. The research that you guys have done. I really encourage anybody to pick this book up. Digital Legend, right, is the website?
That's right.
Yes.
And it's also available on Amazon.
Amazon. And I'll put the link to the book in the description of this video.
Okay,
so
great.
Three things we really wanted to emphasize. There's tons in the book, but we really wanted to talk about three specific things. The Seerstone in the Hat narrative, those who really support that really put a lot of weight on three specific individuals. It's Emma Smith, Martin Harris, and David Whitmer. And the three main sources that people cite are really actually quite questionable in their authenticity. So I just want to give a quick historical summary on where this comes from so that we can then have Jim give us his expert information on this. So we're going to start by talking about Emma Smith's last testimony. For those of you who don't know this was written down way late in Emma Smith's life. I believe she was 75 years old. And this is recorded in 1879 when she's almost about to pass away. So the term on her deathbed is what is used.
It's for real. And just to be clear, it actually wasn't published until after she passed away.
Right. Here's the questionable parts that start to creep in.
Right.
Her son, Joseph Smith III, who was head of the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints at the time, had come to visit her, hearing that she was close to death.
Right.
And they had kind of an agenda in mind, but we'll get into that in a minute. But this was recorded by Joseph Smith III in his handwriting. He was possibly the only person present in the room for this interview with Emma, who is, again, frail and near death. And it's published after her death. And it's cited by many, including most historians in the church, as just factual that this is Emma Smith speaking. And one of the things that Jim and Jonathan point out in their book is that this really may not be Emma. This may have been Joseph Smith III. So I wanted to kind of give that background. And now I want you to tell our audience, Jim, the main reasons you believe that this account of Emma Smith's last testimony is not really credible. It's not likely that this is really Emma speaking.
Okay, so just some quick background on why the interview took place. So now Joseph Smith III was born in 1832, so he was only 11 or 12 years old, I think, when his father was assassinated in 1844. Emma stayed in Nauvoo and with Joseph, and she eventually remarried a man named Louis Bideman. And so she stayed in Nauvoo. She told her children about Mormonism, but she was not, diligent, if you will, about raising them in the faith. So they knew who their father was. She told them good things about their father, but she didn't really teach them a lot about the religion.
So they didn't grow up like in primary where they're hearing the stories and they know the first vision and all this stuff. They're kind of not really members, kind of in the sense that we think of people being raised in the church.
But there were a lot of members who did not follow Brigham Young, and they kind of scattered around the Midwest, but they did believe in the Book of Mormon. These were Book of Mormon believing people, and so they kind of wanted still to follow the religion to some extent. So, they kind of tried to get together and organize. So these guys decided that a great sort of central figure that a lot of people would follow would be Joseph Smith III, eldest son. So they would try to persuade Joseph III to undertake this mission, and he didn't want to do it. He got married. He's going to be a lawyer and start a family and live in Illinois. And then in 1860, after these people just kept hectoring him, he finally felt that he should, in fact, accept this invitation to be head of the reorganized church. One of the things that Joseph Smith III, that he had picked up from his mother, apparently, was an absolute obsession over the fact that his father did not have anything to do with plural marriage. That was just an idée fixe that he got in his head and he never got it out. He said, well, the first principle of our church is going to be that my father never had anything to do with plural marriage. Now, there were a lot of people in the reorganized church who had been were adults in Nauvoo in the last days of Joseph's lifetime. And they came to him and they said, we're against polygamy, but unfortunately, we got to tell you, your father and mother were very involved in the commencement of plural marriage. And Joseph Smith III, he simply wouldn't listen. So they said, go ask your mother. And he put it off and he put it off and he put it off. He would not ask his mother about it. So by 1879, when she's in ill health, he realizes that if he doesn't go and ask her about this, he's never going to hear the end of it. So that's the background of the interview.
I'm curious if part of his motivation seemed to be he's really wanting an official kind of statement from Emma that he could use.
That's
and it
right.
seems to be about, oh, I need to go visit with my mom so I finally get these answers to the question, and more about, I need to get something written down so that I can have this forever to disprove polygamy.
That's correct. Now, the other thing that was going on, Joseph Smith III, he believed in the Book of Mormon. In 1834, a book was published called Mormonism Unveiled, and it was the first full-length anti-Mormon book.
I served my mission in Painesville, Ohio, where they published Mormonism Unveiled.
Oh my goodness. All right. In Mormonism Unveiled, E.B. Howe had presented two explanations for the Book of Mormon. One was the stone in the hat. This is the first time that you really have in a published form the stone in the hat theory. In other words, he was this treasure digger. He had this stone he found and used in his treasure digging activities, and he put it in a hat, and he made up the Book of Mormon. That's the first full expression of this theory that we're talking about, today in 2024.
And we all know that Mormonism Unveiled had these good intentions to help all of us understand how the real translation happened, because that was its objective. Right. Yes.
And the other explanation Howe came up with was the Spalding manuscript. The explanation was Joseph Smith, in those times, they thought was too dumb to write the Book of Mormon. Nowadays, they think he's too smart.
Right. Depends on what they want to attack him for, right?
That's right. It just flips,
Right.
So the theory was that Sidney Rigdon had gotten hold of a manuscript by a man named Solomon Spalding and had smuggled it up to New York, then smuggled it to Joseph Smith, and then Joseph Smith had surreptitiously read off of this manuscript to the scribes to make the Book of Mormon. Right. That was the prevailing theory in the 1800s amongst non-Mormons and anti-Mormons about the explanation of the Book of Mormon. So Joseph Smith III, as a defender of the Book of Mormon, actually was engaged in an active correspondence with a leading anti-Mormon, a man named James Cobb, and I've read through this correspondence. And so he's literally the months before the visit to Emma, he's writing to Joseph Smith III saying, I've got a guy in Palmyra who says that he saw Sidney Rigdon up there talking to Joseph Smith before the Book of Mormon was done. So, and this is, Joseph Smith III is writing back, prove it. He was actively engaged in fighting against the Spalding theory.
And part of the Spalding theory, too, was that the curtain or the veil separating Joseph and Emma was the means by which Joseph is reading the secret manuscript that Sidney Rigdon got from Solomon Spalding.
That's right. So anyway, these are the two hot topics for Joseph Smith III when he goes to see his mother on her deathbed in 1879. And so the last testimony of Sister Emma is Joseph Smith's interview he had with his mother in 1879, although it wasn't published until several months after her death. So she never actually saw it or vetted it or anything. And so as far as we can tell,
he's the only one who's there in the room at the time.
That's right. This is really all comes down to Joseph III. And basically, it tracks, these are the two issues that it's about. It's about plural marriage, and it's about rebutting the Spalding theory.
It's not very long. He doesn't ask her, like you'd think if somebody's interviewing someone on their deathbed, like, hey, tell us your story. It's like, here are the questions I want the answers to. And then he gets the
Exactly.
answers and the interview is
That's
over. It doesn't seem
that's
like it would have taken more than like maybe 5 to 10 minutes. Yeah,
and
yeah.
easily in 15 minutes, questions and answers. And they're all oriented. Like the first question he asks his mother is, did Sidney Rigdon marry you and father?
Right.
Now, what? But the reason that's the first question is because that was part of the Spalding theory. So the majority of the interview is really about plural marriage. Emma denies that Joseph Smith ever had any other wife. She denies she didn't know it. She says she never heard anything about this plural marriage stuff. I mean, it is a complete denial of plural marriage. And then at the end, it kind of tacks on some stuff about the Book of Mormon. And again, here, there's questions like, did father have a manuscript that he read from? Well,
Right.
that's because to rebut the Spalding theory. And it's in this context that Emma is reported to have said that he was looking at a stone in a hat. But she
And I
says things.
and it seems like it's also very set up because he's asking her about anything preventing her from seeing him. In other words, is he hiding a manuscript behind something that he's reading? And
Right.
then you get this account of no, the plates are just on the table. There's a cloth over them. He's making
That's
no
right.
attempt to hide anything from me, which seems very, very kind of convenient to rebutting the Spalding theory of
It's
nothing's being
all
hidden. It's all in the open. It's just happening on the kitchen table. And this seems
right.
to be where we get, even at the church historical sites, they have a recreation of this where plates are on a table with a cloth over them,
Mhm.
and there's a hat there. And it's like, this is all coming from this story from Emma Smith.
That's right. But the thing is, there's details that contradict historical facts. Like in the last testimony, it sounds like Emma's claiming that she was the primary scribe.
Because she says, hours and hours he dictated to me, right?
Which we know. I mean, she was a scribe for some of the lost pages, but no, Oliver Cowdery. Everybody agrees Oliver Cowdery was the primary scribe, and then Martin Harris was, a big guy. So it way exaggerates Emma's involvement, and it contradicts Emma's own statements. In 1870, we have a letter from her. This is the Emma Pilgrim letter.
Yeah.
And in this one, she says, no, the Urim and Thummim were used for the lost pages, and then he used the stone in the hat. But the problem is she was mainly a scribe for the lost pages when she's reported to say in the last testimony that she mainly used that, she was the main scribe and it was always all the stone in the hat. She's contradicting her own things that she wrote to her friend Emma Pilgrim, like just a few years before.
That's a really key distinction to make too, because at least the letter to Emma Pilgrim is in Emma's handwriting, correct?
That's right.
So at least we can say she did actually write this letter.
That's
Even
right.
if maybe her memory of the events is a little confused, at least we can say, yes, this is Emma.
That's
Whereas with
right.
this last testimony, it's very hard to tell if this is really her answering these questions.
So she died only very shortly after. It was a week or two. He wrote a letter to his uncle, William Smith, to report on Emma's funeral and passing. And in that letter, he says, quotes, we found her fast failing,
His
according to Joseph
admission,
Smith
she's
III.
fast failing when he's interviewing her.
That's right. And there is a scholar in the church who has done extensive research to argue that even before this time, when she was physically ill, that she was suffering from some dementia and stuff like that. Even the time before, she was not in good condition at all at this time. So this leaves us with a lot of possibilities. Was he leading her? I mean, remember, he's a lawyer. So clearly, these questions are all on Joseph Smith III's agenda. Was she kind of cognizant and basically telling her son what he wanted to hear? I mean, you're on your deathbed, your oldest son is there asking you all these awkward questions. Are you going to say, oh, no, son, I'm sorry, you're wrong? You're not going to fight with him. And it's a possibility that she was just so far gone that Joseph Smith III just wrote it all up himself. I mean, all of
Yeah.
those are possibilities. But whatever the scenario was, there is just a lot of questions about this document. And it's clear that even if Emma was cognizant and a participant, as she's presented to be, this is all still Joseph Smith III's agenda. It's his language, and he's heavily involved in producing this stuff. So when this was published, I mean, the second it hit Utah, it was just elicited a furious reaction because Utah at this time, 1870, was full of people who knew perfectly well that the revelation about plural marriage came through Joseph and that Emma knew all about it. We have the Deseret News was full of affidavits from women who were still living who had been sealed to Joseph. Eliza R. Snow in the Deseret News wrote a lengthy article, and she said basically either Emma's lying or Joseph Smith III is the actual author of this piece. And she just said it. She just said it right out.
Right
So
out.
there was less dispute about the stone in the hat accounts. It was mainly about the plural marriage. My co-author, Jonathan Neville, has done an analysis of general conference talks from the 1870s and discovered that what happened was while the church never officially rebutted the stone in the hat accounts, suddenly in the 1870s, all the leaders of the church, there was a major uptick in discussions of the Urim and Thummim in general conference talks. So suddenly that becomes a big theme for quite some years in general conferences.
Wow, that's interesting. I've never heard that. That's great. So they're
this is,
responding to the content without addressing the author.
that's right.
In your book, you talk about Joseph Smith III later on writing a rebuttal to the stone in the hat theory himself, which seems
That's right.
ironic since he's there listening to, supposedly there, listening to Emma talk about it. To underline your point again is why do Latter-day Saint historians refute the polygamy denials from Emma Smith's last testimony while wholeheartedly accepting the Book of Mormon translation portion, which is from the same questionable document?
That's exactly right. So, and it's let's just call it a curiosity because it's a single document, and to say, oh, well, the one is completely incorrect but the other is completely correct and should be cited in church literature and gospel topics essays is just makes it's absurd. So the last testimony of Sister Emma was published in the Saints Herald in 1879, but then in 1886, and this is something that we discovered, and that's reported in our book. So this is only a few years after the last testimony of Sister Emma. Joseph III publishes a lengthy article. Now you'd think, oh, well, he's going to go back and cite the last testimony. No mention of the last testimony. Instead, what Joseph III does is he decides, okay, now I'm going to go back and naturally research this. I'm going to go do research. And so he says, okay, my father's very clear that, he makes no mention of the Seerstone. He's very clear that the instrument of translation was interpreters that came with the plates. And he says, I guess that's what we've got to go. Chief instrument was the Urim.
So he has changed his mind, or he's ignoring the evidence he has heard with his own ears, if it actually was ever that,
Right.
to completely write a different narrative that is not supported by what he supposedly heard from his own mother in a firsthand interview, which throws doubt on that whole interview being from Emma.
That's right. That's right.
Or at least
Now,
throws doubt on his willing to trust her mental state. If she really did say those things, he's not believing them at this point.
clearly, he is taking the written record from his father and his father's close companion, Oliver Cowdery, as being more authoritative than whatever it is that he heard from his mother.
So basically, we've established that Emma Smith was in poor health. She's about to pass away. We're unclear on whether or not how aware or conscious she was of what she was saying. She in an earlier letter had questioned her own memory of events and wanted to have her times and seasons to verify what she remembered or what she thought happened with the translation process. And during this, it's only Joseph Smith III witnessing this interview published after Emma's death, and in basically Joseph Smith III's sort of voice.
Right.
And it's very bent on two specific agenda items that Joseph Smith III was very much interested in pushing: anti-polygamy and anti-Spalding theory.
Right. And it's a document which is extremely curious because its treatment by many historians is curious because they will acknowledge that it's completely inaccurate on plural marriage, yet somehow will cite it completely uncritically on the question of translation of the Book of Mormon.